text I've chosen is the Gospel, Mark 1, verses 29 to 39. The theme, a quiet place. Have you ever been to a place that was so peaceful, so quiet, that everything around you just seemed to fade away? The only thing that you focused on was peacefulness or the quietness that was there. Like the old Kellogg commercial. Kellogg, take me away. Everything faded away. It was quiet, a quiet time. This morning we're going to look at our text and see what God is saying to us about a quiet place. First of all, we see that Jesus left the synagogue where his authority was being questioned, and he went to Simon's house, where Simon's mother-in-law was ill, and the disciples told Jesus about her, and he healed her, and she served. Next, we see that when evening fell, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, our text says. They heard about this miracle worker, this Jesus of Nazareth, and all that he had done. And Jesus healed many whom had various diseases, and he drove out demons, our text says. But he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Make note that the last demon he drove out, who knew who he was, and he told them, do not speak. The picture that is drawn for us here is Jesus is doing his ministry, and that he is very, very busy. Perhaps almost too busy. Healing the sick, casting out demons. Next, we see that very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off into a solitary place. We could stop right there and say that he went to be by himself. There is nothing wrong with being by yourself, but Jesus went there not to be by himself in a solitary place. He went there with a purpose. Our text states that he was not in the solitary place just to be by himself, but he went there to pray, which means he wanted to be alone with God, to have an uninterrupted time with God his Father, where there was no distractions, when there was no one pulling on his cloak for his time, and no one but God, and him having a one-on-one with God his Father. Communicating with God. We see throughout Jesus' ministry, he went and found a quiet place, especially when it seemed that he was too busy. Jesus lived a very busy life that was subjected so much in constant pressure of work and ministry, preaching, teaching, casting out demons, healing individuals or large groups of people, surrounded by the excited, jostling, seething multitudes who pathetically eagerness to see and hear must have moved Jesus to pity on everyone. All this demanding service, all this eager self-giving was carried on in an atmosphere of prayer. We must realize that prayer was not simply a part of Jesus' life. It was his life. Prayer was a habitual attitude of his mind and of his heart. It could be said that prayer was the atmosphere in which he lived. It was the very air that he breathed. No matter how busy, he could always turn aside and find a quiet moment and enter a conversation with God the Father. Other times we see Jesus turning aside and going away from the crowds is when he was truly man. He was subjected, as we are, to the upsurges of deep emotion, especially the emotion of profound sorrow or great joy. Also, we see Jesus turn aside to pray in the midst of spiritual conflict and even death. John 12:20 and 28, or Luke 23:39 and 46, the garden. And this is the main emphasis of our text. Jesus withdrew to a quiet place and prayed. Our lives are busy. Just ask anyone sitting around, and we would all be able to give a rendition of how busy it is, how busy our lives are. If it's not one thing, it's another that pulls for our time. We only have 24 hours a day. Many will say that, only 24 hours a day. Even this last week, I was so busy that I almost didn't have time to do the sermon. Well, actually, I did have time to do the sermon. Busy is the way we are. Busy of going around doing this or doing that. All of it, of course, is necessary. All of it is important. But do we become too busy to have a conversation with God, our Father? Jesus is setting an example for us to follow. That we should find a quiet time and a quiet place and go to the Lord in conversation. Turn off and tune out. That kind of was something they said in the 60s and 70s. But today it's turn off and tune out all distractions. Anything that would take our full attention from our conversation with our Father, everything that takes that distraction should be avoided. I'm not talking about taking an hour or two, just a few minutes a day in our busy schedules to go before the Lord in conversation. When we are overworked, overloaded, or the emotional high or the emotional low, or dealing with spiritual conflict, maybe even facing death, that's when we should go aside, find a quiet place, and pray. There was a movie about a prayer room one time, and how people would set up specific rooms to go into and pray. And we don't have to do that. We just need to know that we need to spend some time with God each day. At my church in Kent, I would go on prayer retreats twice a year. I would ask for personal prayer requests from the congregation, then take them out to the retreat and find a quiet place and have a conversation with God about the needs and concerns of the congregation. Jesus showed us how to do this in our text. I know we all have busy schedules from sun up to sundown, and can we squeeze one more moment into our precious time about asking too much from us? Find the quiet place, a quiet moment. Or at night, as you turn out the light, the time is yours and God's. Or like this morning, early morning, my time was with God for sure. Jesus went out to a solitude place and prayed as our text says, as we go about our busy schedules, about our busy lives. We should, as Jesus did, go to a solitude place, a quiet place, not to be alone, but to be alone with God, and have a conversation with Him, one-on-one. Have a conversation with God, our Father. Amen.